Margaret Chen lay motionless in her hospital bed, her eyes barely open to thin slits. The breathing tube felt heavy, but she forced herself to remain perfectly still. Through her half-closed lids, she watched the janitor enter her private room. Thomas Bradford pushed his cleaning cart quietly across the polished floor. His uniform was worn but clean, the janitorial patch on his chest pocket slightly faded from countless washes. At 58 years old, his hands showed the weathering of decades of hard work, but his movements were gentle and purposeful. Margaret had built her pharmaceutical empire from nothing. At 61, she had seen everything money could buy and everyone it could change. The car accident 3 days ago had left her bruised and recovering, but when she overheard the nurses gossiping about her wealth, something made her decide to stay silent. She wanted to see who people really were when they thought she couldn't hear them. Thomas began wiping down the surfaces near her bed, humming softly. It was an old gospel tune, the kind Margaret's own mother used to sing while cooking Sunday dinner 40 years ago. The memory caught her off guard. "Lord, please watch over this woman," Thomas whispered, thinking she was unconscious. "I don't know her story, but I know she's somebody's daughter, somebody's friend, maybe somebody's mother." Margaret felt something tighten in her chest. It had been 3 years since anyone had prayed for her without wanting something in return. Thomas carefully adjusted the blanket that had slipped from her shoulder. "My daughter, Sarah, would be about your age if she'd lived," he continued quietly, his voice thick with old grief. "Lost her to cancer 12 years ago. Every time I see a woman lying here, I think maybe somebody would have done the same for my baby girl." Tears threatened to escape Margaret's closed eyes. She fought to keep her breathing steady. "Her little boy Jason, he's 16 now," Thomas went on carefully, dusting around her medical equipment. "Smart as a whip, that kid. Got himself a full scholarship opportunity to engineering school, but we're still short on the housing and books. Been picking up every extra shift I can find." He paused, straightening the flowers someone had sent from her company's board of directors. Flowers with no real sentiment behind them. "I tell Jason not to worry," Thomas said, "that the good Lord provides. His mama would have wanted him to follow his dreams. She was a nurse, you know. Spent her whole life taking care of people, even when she was sick herself. That's where Jason gets his heart from." Margaret heard him move to the window, adjusting the blinds to keep the afternoon sun from hitting her face directly. "Hope you got people who love you," Thomas said. "Money in big hospital rooms don't mean much if you wake up alone. I learned that lesson the hard way." The next morning, Margaret's doctor came in for rounds. Thomas was there again, emptying the trash. "Any change?" Thomas asked the doctor quietly. "Not yet," the doctor replied. "But her vitals are strong. I'm hopeful." "I'll keep praying then," Thomas said simply. "Been doing it every shift." After they left, Margaret finally allowed a single tear to slide down her cheek. For 3 more days, Thomas came by twice per shift. He always prayed, always adjusted her blanket, always spoke to her like she mattered beyond her bank account. On the 6th day, Margaret decided she had learned enough. When Thomas came in that evening, she slowly opened her eyes fully. "Water," she whispered hoarsely. Thomas nearly dropped his cleaning spray. His face lit up with pure joy. "Oh, thank the Lord, let me get the nurse." Within minutes, the medical team was there, checking her over. Margaret played along, acting weaker than she felt, but her eyes kept finding Thomas, who stood in the corner, with his hand over his heart, tears running down his face. When the doctors finally left, Thomas approached her bedside shyly. "Ma'am, I'm so glad you're back with us. So very glad. You prayed for me," Margaret said, her voice still raspy. "Every day." Thomas looked surprised. "You could hear that? Every word." Margaret reached out a trembling hand. "Tell me more about Jason and your daughter Sarah." Over the next hour, Thomas shared his story. Sarah had been a single mother working double shifts as a nurse when the diagnosis came. Stage 4, too far gone. She made Thomas promise to raise Jason with love and to make sure he got an education. She didn't want him limited like we were, Thomas explained, his weathered hands clasped together. Wanted him to have choices, to use that brilliant mind of his. "The scholarship," Margaret said. How much do you need for housing and books? Thomas shook his head quickly. Oh no, ma'am, I wasn't telling you that story for money. I don't even know who you are. I just talk to patients sometimes. Helps them heal, I think, hearing a human voice. Humor me, Margaret insisted. How much? About $15,000 for the first year, Thomas admitted reluctantly. I've got 8 saved up. Figure I'll get there somehow before August. Margaret smiled, the first genuine smile in months. Thomas Bradford, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. I'm Margaret Whitmore. I own Whitmore Pharmaceuticals. I'm worth roughly $4 billion. Thomas's eyes went wide. I had no idea, ma'am. Exactly, Margaret said warmly. You treated me like a person, not a bank account. You prayed over me like I was your own daughter. Do you know how rare that is in my world? Thomas shifted uncomfortably. I just did what felt right. Which is exactly why I'm going to do something for you, Margaret continued. Jason's scholarship, housing, books, everything he needs for all 4 years, it's covered. Consider it done. Ma'am, I can't accept, Thomas started. You can and you will, Margaret interrupted gently. But there's more. I'm creating a new foundation in Sarah's name. We're going to fund scholarships for children who've lost parents to cancer. Children like Jason who deserve a chance. And Thomas, I want you to help me run it. Thomas stood frozen, tears streaming down his face. You'd have a real salary, Margaret explained. An office. You'd interview candidates, share Sarah's story, give these kids hope. What do you say? Thomas sank into the chair beside her bed, overcome. Why? He whispered. Why would you do all this? Margaret took his hand in both of hers. Because you reminded me of who I used to be, before the money and the boardrooms. You reminded me what actually matters. Kindness, human dignity, showing up for people even when there's nothing in it for you. That's worth more than all my billions. Sarah would have liked you, Thomas said, smiling through his tears. She always said the measure of a person is what they do when nobody's watching. She raised you well, Margaret replied. And you're raising Jason the same way. That's a legacy money can't buy. 3 months later, at the opening ceremony of the Sarah Bradford Memorial Scholarship Foundation, Thomas stood beside Margaret as they awarded 15 full scholarships to deserving students. Jason was there too, preparing for his first semester of engineering school. Margaret watched Thomas embrace his grandson, both of them crying happy tears, and she finally understood what her mother had tried to teach her all those years ago. Wealth means nothing if it doesn't flow toward love, and the truest riches are found in simple acts of human kindness. Sometimes you have to pretend to be asleep to finally wake up to what matters most.